Welcome to a special edition of Stories of Brisco and Bradshaw. I'm John Layfield, better known as Bradshaw, and I'm joined as always with my WWE Hall of Fame partner and Chickasha native and Chickasha Hall of Famer, Mr. Gerald Brisco. And we have got one of the greatest rock stars of all time. Hundreds of millions of albums sold, co-writer of the great song Hotel California. Got a wonderful new album out, The Vault, 50 Years of Music. He is Mr. Don Felder. Don, welcome to the show.
Oh, fantastic. It's so great to talk to you guys. Thank you for taking the time to do this. We got a lot of good stories about the vault, as a matter of fact. So let's kick that off.
I would love to hear
Oh,
them because it's so interesting to me. You got songs like Move On from 1974, and then you got songs from 2023. I like the things you do, and you got two new songs. It's just so cool to have literally 50 years of music. When did you come up with the idea to put this whole thing together?
I stumbled into the concept. I had lived out in Malibu for 29 years and went through five major fires. Friends
Wow.
of mine's houses burned down, his studio burned down with all of his classic old Les Pauls and Fender Stratocaster. A lot of people over the years, the 29 years I lived out there, got hurt in the fire. So finally, after the last one, I said, "That's it. I'm moving out of Malibu. I love it, but I used to call it the Maliboonies because it was so far out. You had to drive all the way to the end of the beach to get anything, and then drive back into Santa Monica or to get to the airport during the summer with the traffic was just a nightmare. I love it out there, but." It was time for me to move into town. So I had a recording studio going on out there that I've always had a studio of some sort on my property. And so I just got somebody and we packed it all up and put it in a storage unit. And I moved into Beverly Hills and started looking for a house to buy. And I found this house and bought it from Seal that already had a recording studio in it. So
wow.
that's where I'm sitting right now in that house. But that was 2000. And so I eventually about 20 years later, I'm sitting in the studio going, I've got all that equipment, recording consoles, and tape machines. I got to go see what I've got. It's been 20 years since I've even seen this stuff. Let's go take a look in that locker. So we go in and I start seeing all of these 24 track recording tapes of songs that I had done and demos and Eagles recordings and 16 track Eagles recordings when we were rehearsing out in my studio in Malibu. And all of these I come across this box that has got to have over 100 cassettes and ADATs and CDs and all those rough mixes I was doing. And when I moved, I just threw it all in this box. And I went, I have no idea what's in this box. I'm going to take this back to my new studio and we're going to transfer all this stuff from cassette into digital 96K with Pro Tools. So in the process of transferring these things, I heard some stuff. I went, wow, that was
Hmm.
a really great slide part. I remember that slide part. I wrote it. It was the very first kind of track I wrote and submitted to the Eagles. And it was called at the time Slide On because I was playing slide guitar on it, right? And Henley came up with the idea of writing a song about Slide On. And I went, nah, that just sounds a little cheesy to me. So I had just broken up about 5 years ago with somebody I was engaged to, and it was just time to move on. So I went, you know what? I'm going to take Slide On and write this song about Move On, use my great slide parts that were on it, and I'll have a new song. So all of those songs that are on this record are starting ideas that were really written either for my solo records or for Eagles albums, uh, like at different times of my career in writing from 74 to 2024. So each one of them has a story.
Don, that must have been really cool to go through your collection like that and bring out old memories. Did you come up? I'm sure you came up with recordings with some of your friends who were no longer with us and everything. Had to bring up special memories and special vibes when you were going through that. But just being able to say, was there any really close calls where you almost lost your collection? I mean, that would be catastrophic to lose.
No, that's why it's in a fireproof storage unit right now. After I moved out of Malibu,
Yeah.
I put it somewhere where my guitars are over there.
Beforehand, it was just stuck in your closet or what?
No, it was just in one of the garages. I had this four-car garage, and
Yeah.
two-car garage was converted into studio, and the other single-car garage was like storage and guitars
Yeah.
and stuff for the to
Like
make
the rest
tapes
of
and
us
demo.
folk. Yeah.
That's right, like a home studio, you know. And though, so when we moved, we just packed it all into boxes and put it in storage. As a matter of fact, I didn't even get probably a tenth of the way through listening to these cassettes before I said, "Stop. I've got enough ideas here. I can make an album out of these ideas." Like
Yeah.
there was one. I don't play keyboards. I can sort of hack my way along. I can play this way much better than I can play this way, right? My nickname when I'm playing this way is the claw because I just kind of like claw at the keyboards, right? So
Yeah.
I had this synthesizer that had an electric piano sound on it, like a Fender Rhodes. And I'm just sitting around in the studio and I'm making up this progression, and it's a really beautiful progression. And I just heard it, just me playing that electric piano sound on one of those cassettes. And I went, stop, back up, play that again. I need to hear that. And I picked up an acoustic guitar and I transposed it from keyboard to guitar. And so I made the progression. After I did it, it was just a beautiful ballad. I got my daughter Leah to sing on it with me. It's called Together Forever. And it just came from like a little glitch of a chord progression, you know? And so when I heard these things, I went, that was really a beautiful progression. That was a great slide part. That was really a good idea. Like Hollywood Victim, I was actually writing it for what was going to be the Hell Freezes Over tour because we were trying to get as many songs on that record as we could. I think we wound up with 4 new songs and that was it. But for every Eagles project or album, I would write an abundance of song ideas. When I first joined the band, my high school bandmate and lifelong friend, Bernie Ledden, told me, if you want to write songs for the Eagles, don't write melodies and don't write lyrics. Just write music beds like introduction, first verse, second verse, chorus, third verse, chorus, solo, chorus, 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 right? In a song structure. And then give the guys those tapes, those ideas. And if they hear something they like, they'll write lyrics and songs to it. They were really the lyricists and the main singers. So Bernie had learned that by making up stuff like Witchy Woman. He wrote all the music parts to the Witchy Woman, despite the Henley writing the melody and Don and Glenn writing the vocals. So I started every time we do a project, I'd write 5, 10, 15, 20 ideas coming up and just submit everything, you know? And if something sticks to the wall, like Hotel California was originally just one of those demos on a tape. And it was originally entitled, I think, Mexican Reggae was the
Wow.
working title for it.
Really?
Before
That
we
was the
had,
original title.
that was it. Yeah. It was a
Tremendous.
nickname. It was a nickname because there weren't any lyrics to the song, right? But it just sounds like a Mexican reggae song. And so Henley or Glenn came up with that name. And the other song that came out of that pile of ideas was Victim of Love. No melody, no nothing. But if you listen to the guitar introduction that I play, it became the melody for the verse that Don sang lyrics to, right? So it was like, here, I'm going to give you an idea up front, but it's not going to be a vocal, it's not going to be a lyric. I'll just play it on guitar for you. And it kind of stuck and worked out really well.
You mentioned your high school friend there, Gainesville High School. Let's give a shout out to Gainesville High School. I'm down in Tampa, Florida. And when I was beginning wrestler in Florida, we wrestled and did a lot of fundraisers for Gainesville High School. With the wrestling football coach up there was big fans of ours, so we got to go up there and give. But what a talented group you had. Stephen Stills also come out of your high school too. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I read somewhere where you got your first guitar traded a bag or a bag of cherry bomb for your first guitar. Is that true, Troy?
It wasn't even a whole bag; it was just a handful. We had been up in Norwood, North Carolina, visiting my favorite aunt and uncle, and my favorite uncle would take us out, me and my older brother, with a 22 rifle that had like rat shot in it, and we would shoot down big clumps of mistletoe, right? Shoot the
Yeah,
branches until they fell
right.
down. Then we'd cut those little pieces of mistletoe up, put a little ribbon on it, put it in a thing of plastic, and we'd go sell them for 50 cents. So he taught us how to make money every Christmas with the little. And he gave us that rifle one year. He snuck it into the trunk of my dad's car. And my dad had to supervise it, obviously, which is the right thing to do. But one year when we were coming back, he snuck a box of cherry bombs into the trunk of our car. My brother and I went, as soon as we get in the driveway, we got to jump out and go back and help Dad unload the trunk. Okay, you grab it and you go take the first suitcase in and hide it. Don't let him see it because he'll take it away from us like any parent would with two young kids. So when we grew up in Gainesville, we lived on a dirt road, and on both sides of the road was a ditch, and the street was crowned, so the water would fall off the street into the ditch and run down these two ditches. To get from the road to your house, they had these big metal culverts. They were about 10, 12 feet long, probably 3 feet in diameter. So, and they put dirt over the top. So when it rained, the water would be running down that creek or down that ditch and in that culvert. And we would light a cherry bomb and throw it upstream, run back into the house. It would float down and go into that culvert, and boom! Everybody'd come running out of their house. What was that? I don't know. Did you hear something? So anyway, the kid across the street saw us doing that and came over and said, I want some of those firecrackers. I want some of those. I said, well, I've seen this guitar you have in the top of your closet. It wasn't really a beautiful guitar, but it's the only one I'd ever seen in real life. I tell you what, I'll give you a handful of these cherry bombs if you go give me that guitar. So he runs back home, comes back over, gives me the guitar. I give him the cherry bombs. About 10 minutes later, all of his cherry bombs are gone, but I've got a guitar.
Wow.
And I think he got blamed for all the previous explosions too, when he got caught with all those cherry bombs.
That's a great story, but when you're coming back from Carolina, you're going into Florida, all those along the border, all those crazy head fireworks. I mean, we made that trip a million times, probably like you did, but we'd always stop at one of those crazy heads and buy them because that was the only place I think cherry bombs were legal at the time too.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, they're completely illegal in California now. Thank God. All the fires we had. But it was funny that you mentioned the Gators. I grew up there, and on Saturday, I would go down early, about 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, and stand outside the swamp. They had these big doors that would open up, and the trucks would drive in with ice and Gatorade and all the cold drinks, all that stuff. And when they opened the doors, the guys that owned the concessions would come down and pick out people to walk around up and down the stairs and sell racks of Cokes and snow cones and all that stuff. So I could go out and make some money and watch the Gators game, which was most important. Every Saturday I could watch the Gators game and then sell racks of Coke. And then later I met this guy on a bus down there. And it turned out that it was Tim Tebow's father. And we were at this same SEC game that Tim Tebow was supposed to win, but they lost. Anyway, we were talking about growing up in Gainesville, and I said, yeah, I used to go out to the swamp every Saturday that they were in town, and I'd sell racks of Coke. He said, well, I sold snow cones. You were walking up and down at the same time I was. I said, snow cones? Nobody wants that syrup. He said, they didn't buy the snow cones for the syrup. They just wanted the ice for their drinks. Here I am lugging these heavy racks of Cokes, and he's selling ice and like hotcakes,
You had a pretty interesting dynamic growing up. I was watching the interview you did with Dan Rather. It was just fantastic. But you mentioned that your brother was an academic. I don't think he went on to become a lawyer, academic scholarship, and you were at age 14 playing a rock and roll band in a bar. So it just seems like a pretty cool, interesting dynamic of your family.
Now, who do you think was the black sheep of the family with just those two brothers? The academic sports, he was the pitcher on the high school baseball team, quarterback on the football team, top of the class in every class he took, just a great scholar. got academic scholarship at the University of Florida, went to law school there. Before he graduated, he had a partnership offer, and so he went right from school right into law. Anyway, and here I am banging around playing wet t-shirt contests on Wednesday nights, so in bars.
For a teenager, there's nothing wrong with that, Doc.
That's right. You're exactly
He
right.
probably envied you, while he's standing there with all those stuffed suits. You're standing there with all those wet t-shirt contests.
Yeah, there you go.
The album is being released on May 23rd. This month coming up pretty soon. The Vault 50 Years of Music. Very few times in life do you have something that is such an artistic expression of yourself that you can kind of measure if you choose to, or if you see something that's worth measuring. You have this from the 70s to now. Did you learn anything different about yourself? Is there anything different about your music from this hard charging young rock and roll star to now still the rock and roll star, but the iconic legend?
Well, I just fell in love with music when I was 10 years old. When I first got that beat up broken guitar, we didn't have Wi-Fi, we didn't have the internet, we barely had black and white TV, and it went off the air at sundown when we were growing up. Right. We had three channels. I think it was ABC, CBS, and NBC, and that was it. And so I spent a lot of time doing stuff, as a kid, driving my bike around on dirt roads, building forts in the woods, catching turtles in the swamps nearby, and just living outside. But when I got a guitar, I would spend a lot of time sitting on my front porch after school. My mom had this metal glider that would glide back and forth, and I would sit on that thing and just try to figure out, how do you make this thing sound like Elvis Presley? How do you sound like Buddy Holly? Those were the stars of the day. How do I make this thing go? And so there was no music store there. We couldn't afford lessons anyway. So I just had to teach myself. My dad bought from a yard sale, he bought a Voice of Music reel-to-reel tape recorder that had like little 7-inch reels on it, And a couple of weeks later, he bought a turntable so we could borrow people's records, copy them onto these tapes, and I could go back and forth without scratching up the records, and learn how to play stuff on Elvis records, on Buddy Holly records, on BB King records. Wherever I could borrow an album, I would learn whatever I could off that way.
Is it a true story where you lost several talent contests to Duane Allman playing guitar?
Well, myself, Bernie, and I became good friends with Greg and Duane over in Daytona Beach. We were all in battles of the bands with each other, but we would both play different shows in Daytona. And after the shows were done, we'd all get together and go over to a diner and sit out at 1 o'clock in the morning, just having breakfast before we went to bed. And frequently, Bernie and I would just go over and crash on the couch in their mom's house instead of driving back Friday night, driving back on Saturday to do a show from Gainesville and then back. We'd just stay over at Duane's house with Greg and Duane. And one night I walked in and Greg was singing and Duane was playing slide guitar sitting on the floor. And I went, I'd never seen anybody play slide like him in my life. Normally it was African-American blues guys that could just kind of get around a little bit, but he was in a different stratosphere. He was just God. And so I said, you got to show me how to do that. So he taught me basically how to tune it, where the pulls are, where you pull down on the fifth, slide up slowly on a third, pull down from the root to a seventh, blah, 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 those kind of things. And I never really tried to emulate him or copy him because he was many lifetimes ahead of me on slide guitar, to tell you the truth. So there was no way I was going to ever step up to him. But he really did show me the basic and give me an inspiration about it. To watch him play with, how could you not be inspired?
Exactly.
When people do incredible things, it always amazes me because there's sometimes a certain time in people's life where they have this outpouring of creativity or something just happens. Maybe it's luck, maybe it's fortune, whatever it is. Did you know at the time, I mean, they're around 74 when Hotel California become the biggest selling album of all time. Did you know that what zone you were in at that time, that you were putting out stuff that was absolutely iconic? Maybe not to the degree it was going to go. I don't think anybody can know that. Maybe you did, but did you know that you're doing something that's pretty cool?
Well, it's funny because you really never know. You may think, track three on an album is going to be the one that becomes the biggest hit, and it gets no airplay. It just doesn't resonate. So when we finished Hotel California, the record label had been pounding on the door to come in and hear this record. So we had a playback party for the record label, and there are AR guys and the president, all these stuff. And after Hotel California went by, Don Henley turned around to the record label and said, "That's going to be one of our singles." And back in 76 or 77, AM radio had a very specific format. It had to be 3 minutes to 3 minutes and 30 seconds long. It had to either be a dancing rocker thing or a drippy ballad. And from needle drop, it couldn't be longer than 30 seconds before the singer started singing. So the disc jockey only had to talk an introduction for like at the most 30 seconds, and the music would start. Hotel California was 6.5 minutes.
Wow.
You can't dance to it. The introduction's over a minute long before Don starts singing. It stops in the middle for mirrors on the ceiling, pink champagne. It breaks down. Then it's got this 2 minute guitar solo on the end of it. It's the absolute wrong format for AM radio. And so I was like, Don, I don't know. I think that's an FM cut. He said, nope, that's going to be on AM radio. I went, okay. And I've never been so happy to have been so wrong in my entire life.
Do you ever feel like a guy that has so much success at one point in their life, and you're still having incredible success? You got the album coming out, The Vault, May 23rd. It's a wonderful album. Me and Mr. Briscoe both enjoyed listening to it today as we're getting ready for the interview. I'm glad we got to. But it is. I always wondered about like the old superhero, that would come back and kind of wear the costume when they're it kind of drapes on them. How do you address that? How do you feel like that? Because when you come back, people are like, oh, you're all the Eagles, but you've got all this great body of work here. How do you address that as far as you're reinventing yourself and recreating yourself all the time to be the 2025 Don Felder, not the 1975 Don Felder, if that makes sense?
Well, I think everybody grows. They develop their skills. If you start off, at 10 years old playing guitar, 70 years later, you ought to be able to play better than you did when you started. So I just have loved writing music, recording music. So I have a studio. I love walking in, no idea what I'm going to do. Just turn on the studio, pick up a guitar, push record, and play and see what comes out. Sometimes just stuff comes out, and I learned to improvise in New York City when I was there for a year and a half, starving on the streets. But just to make up stuff, we had a jazz fusion rock band that had like vocals, like verses and a chorus, but then in the middle we'd have these 5 or 6 minute just jams, where I'd get to go off for 2 or 3 minutes, and we had a soprano sax player that would play a solo, and bass player and drummer would take a solo together. We just learned to improvise, and I think one of the best examples of that is that Don Henley knew that I could just make up stuff. So when we're getting ready to do the Hell Freezes Over tour, we're sitting on the stage at Warner Brothers. There's about 15 or 20 video cameras. There's recording trucks. There's an orchestra behind us. We do our little acoustic arrangement, which I worked up with Joe for the unplugged version of Hotel. We just finished that, and Henley said, this song needs a special introduction. And I was like, well, what are you going to say? He said, no. I don't want to. I thought he was going to say something about the song or here we are back together in California. He said, no. Just make up an introduction. Okay. So here we go. All right. You guys play this chord. I'll noodle around. Then you play this chord. I'll noodle around. Play the last chord and I'll noodle all the way up to the very top and get to the point where it kind of stops. And then we'll start percussion. So we did 2 recordings of it, 2 videos of it, so we could edit in between the two shows. And I just made up one for the first time, and the second show I just made up another one. When we got in the studio and listened, the very first one I did was better than the one that I did the second time around. So it was a matter of just being creative. And I love to walk in and not know what I'm going to do and everything. Just create something. And the creative part of the music business is just as much fun for me to walk in and build a whole song ideas and tracking and be able to call my friends to come play on these things like Jim Keltner and Nathan East and Matt Bissonette, just an amazing group of players that can come in and play on these ideas. But I only make those phone calls when I think I've got a really good framework for them to come play on, you know?
Yeah.
But I love that creative part. Like these two new tracks on here, there are guitar sounds on there that I've never done before.
Yeah.
And sometimes they sound like me on a solo, but the rest of the track is completely different than what I would have played although I played them. It just it's a different way of making yourself sound different. It's like wearing a different skin for that song or something, you know?
Yeah. Don, through your years, you've been around and seen changes in the music industry, all the way from the very beginning where you were just acoustical. And do you feel like music is kind of losing its soul or losing its personality with all the new AI technology coming in? Or how do you feel about that opposed to your groups?
Well, do you know what there was before Pro Tools?
No.
There were pros that could
Yeah, there
play,
you go.
sing, and write together, right? So if you go back and look at some of these live videos of the Eagles in the 70s when I'm in the band live, it's amazing to me, just amazing to me how great we sounded. Live vocals, live harmonies, guitar parts, the band just gelled so well together. And when you have something like that, you really don't need AI.
Right.
You don't need to be perfectly corrected pitch wise, or that's one of the things we did. We didn't have auto tune or anything like that. So if there was a line in a vocal that somebody was singing, whether it was Joe or Timothy or Don or Glenn, we would sing that line until it was perfect. Naturally, it wasn't something you just, oh, well, okay, I'll fix that. So it's a little early, a little late, a little pitchy. And the same thing with guitar parts. When we did the guitar parts for the end of Hotel California, Joe and I had never played that harmony together as we were making it up. We literally had to figure it out bar by bar by bar because every bar the chord would change and you'd have to play a different harmonies together. So we had to go through and learn that like first graders. Okay, what are we going to play on this bar? What are we going to play on this bar? And then finally we got to the point where we could almost play the whole thing through without error. And a couple of times we had to punch in and fix, but it was still us playing. It wasn't a matter of going technologically wise to correct stuff because I think it loses its soul when you do that too much. It doesn't sound human. It doesn't sound emotional. It sounds perfect, but it just doesn't have the emotion to me.
The 70s were such a cool time. They always say if you remember the 70s, you didn't live them right. So
Well,
it was
I've been told I had a great time.
Yeah. I have a slight memory lapse of 70s.
But there were such iconic bands that were produced during that time in the 60s and 70s. You don't have a British invasion now or a Canadian invasion or anything now.
Yeah.
And those bands that were there then are still the big bands now. It's unbelievable what happened during that time to produce these iconic bands.
I just think the largest music explosion in the history of rock and roll was Woodstock. I was there for 3 solid days. I saw the greatest American rock and roll musicians in history. I saw Janis Joplin. I saw Jimi Hendrix. I saw Carlos Santana. I saw Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young with my high school buddy Steven Stills on stage. I went, what?
Wow.
He's playing? Hell, if he can do it, I can do it too. So he's the one that motivated me to move out to California. Anyway, just a ton of Grateful Dead, amazing players. And I think that event was such a huge explosion in the music business that for decade after decade after decade after decade, people were influenced by that. Younger people wanted to pick up guitars and learn how to play it, wanted to sound like Jimi Hendrix or sound like Jimmy Page, or, I think that was the initial explosion to me worldwide that set that in motion. And I know that it changed me dramatically just seeing all those people and hearing all that stuff. As crazy as it was, wet and muddy and everything, nobody cared. They just loved the music. So uh, I think it's a matter of when it's just like sitting on the porch playing guitar. You don't have, iPhone, you don't have iPads. As a matter of fact, there's one track on here called Digital World, and it's about that, how everybody, you go to catch a flight, you're sitting in the airport, everybody sitting in the airport is staring at their phone. They're not talking. You go to a restaurant and there's a father and a mother and two or three kids. The little kids are looking at iPads, and the mom and dad are texting somebody, or it's just like, it has become something that's just an addiction, a really powerful addiction. I wrote that song on here because I have a 15 and a half, almost 16-year-old son. But during COVID, he was locked in his room. I mean, he did all of his classes in his room. He played games online on his room. All of his friends were, nobody could come over. He couldn't play baseball. It was just, he became literally addicted to that iPhone in his room. And I was like, okay, there's a real world out there. Remember that now, so don't just get so preoccupied with all the strings and digital stuff that you miss the world going by.
Don, you're still incredibly busy. You travel a lot with Styx, the Kevin Cronin band. I looked at your schedule online. You have an incredible schedule. You're still touring all the time, which I think is fantastic. Me and Mr. Briscoe, we used to work 300 nights a year, in our business. I just, you kind of get addicted to it. Do you just do you love performing? Do you love being in front of people? Is that why you do it so much?
I don't need to make another dollar for the rest of my life. I don't need to get on a plane or on a bus I love doing what I do, walking out in front of 5, 10, 15, 20,000 people and playing these songs that I co-wrote or recorded with the band, and some of my original stuff like heavy metal and things like that that they know me for. And by the end of the last three or four songs, when we're doing like Heartache Tonight, Life in the Fast Lane, and Hotel California, and everybody's up with their iPhones, looking at their iPhone instead of just looking at me, but they're videoing me playing Hotel, and they're dancing and rocking, and we're just having a great time. And that's what really just makes me want to get up and go get on a bus and another plane. It's all about that symbiotic relationship you have with an audience that's very appreciative.
And you still get that adrenaline rush every time you walk out there and hear that applause, right?
Absolutely. I'm addicted. I'll
Yeah,
admit it.
we all are to that. Once you've had it, it's hard to not to live without it.
That's right. Yeah.
You've literally sold hundreds of millions of albums, and you're out there now still producing incredible music, just like you've done for the last over half a century. Do you look back now and look at this album, The Vault, which comes out, by the way, May 23rd, 50 years of music? Do you look at it back now and go, this is actually pretty cool. This is a pretty cool little aggregation of my life's work in this 50 years of music.
Yeah, I do. At first I didn't know quite what I should do with some of those ideas, but if you find something that started really good and you just let it fall to the wayside, to me it's a gift that you're throwing away. So I thought, well, let me take this original inspiration that I had and put some flesh on its bones. And what have I got to lose? A couple of days in the studio, trying to rebuild it. And the more I worked on these ideas, the more inspired I got by them. In other words, this is me taking an idea from 50 years ago of me, my idea 50 years ago, and breathing life into it again today. And it's still me, but it's like a whole different me. My skills are different, my talents and my production skills are different. The studios I've got are different. And like when I redid heavy metal, I really thought, well, I've been listening to that thing for, I don't know, it came out in 80, 81, something like that. And for the time, it sounded really great, but it sounds very old and kind of analog. You know what I mean? When you make a record now and you can record it at 96K and Pro Tools and the mixing capabilities with Chris Lloyd Alge as the engineer mixing for me and the mastering that can be done today, it can be made to sonically sound absolutely amazing. So I wanted to take that song and redo it. We re-recorded the whole thing in 96K and Pro Tools, remastered it, reproduced it, remixed it, the whole thing. And I think if you put them side by side, you'll see that this one sounds a whole lot better. Hopefully it'll run for another 40 or 50 years.
Now, does it shock you sometime when you're introduced to the album? This is 50 years of my memory. 50 years, wow, in the music.
I don't say that around the young women, to tell you the truth.
I don't blame you.
I got it.
You probably have them coming up to you like John has, and one of these little girls. My grandmother had a crush on you.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Yeah, it's just shocking when you see a 50-year-old person say, "I grew up watching you." And I'm like, "Oh, come on, you're killing me." Hey, Don, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. It's been so much fun. Me and Mr. Brisco had so much fun today listening to your music and going through your bio and all that stuff. Such an articulate guy. You had a health scare recently. Is your health? You look incredibly healthy. Is your health good?
My health is fantastic. As a matter of fact, I feel like I'm 27, to tell you the truth.
That's
But
awesome.
I think a lot of it is just I'm really enjoying what I'm doing in life. I love writing and playing and recording music. I love touring and playing on stage. And yeah, there's a lot of other work that goes on behind the scenes to do that. But I just get thrilled that have this opportunity at this point in my life to still tour, to still make albums, to still put out good quality products and have fun doing it. So I don't need the money. I just love making music, and that's why I'm doing this.
That's awesome. And it certainly shows. And May 23rd, the album drops. It's The Vault, 50 Years of Music by Mr. Don Felder. Don, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, JB.